Good morning, everybody, and welcome to class number 6 of our 2026 virtual HOA and Condo Academy. Today is Tuesday, June 16th, 2026, and we're going to be teaching a class today on how to thrive as a board, defining roles, avoiding burnout, and hiring right. As we have people join the Zoom call this morning and join us on Facebook Live, I'm just going to make a few introductory remarks. So first, hi, everybody. Welcome to our class number 6 of our 2026 virtual HOA Condo Academy. We teach these classes in partnership with the cities of Avondale, Chandler, Glendale, Goodyear, Mesa, Peoria, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Surprise, and the city of Tempe. My name is Beth Mulcahy, and I'm the founder and senior partner and attorney for the Mulcahy Law Firm in Phoenix, Arizona. Our firm currently represents over 1,000 planned communities and condominiums in the state of Arizona. I also currently serve on my HOA board and have for many years. We have a lot to cover today in our 1-hour session. As you probably see on your screen, we've got our poll that's up there, and if you might want to take a chance to take a look at it right now, that would be great, and fill it out for us. We do have a lot to cover today. I'll start with an update on the 2026 legislative update and legislative session, which just ended on Saturday of last weekend. We're going to talk about several key bills that have recently been signed into the law by Governor Hobbs, and I'll also briefly cover a new HUD memorandum on emotional support animals that boards need to be aware of. And from there, we're going to move into today's main topics for our classes today. We're going to talk about board member roles and responsibilities, how to reduce board member burnout. That's a very key topic right now. And how to select a management company and other vendors for your community. Okay, and then we're going to take questions like we always do at the end of each class. I'll wrap up the main presentation right around noon, hopefully, and then we'll move directly into the question and answer session. Every question that's submitted here today will be answered before we sign off for the day. The only thing that we ask is that due to the number of attendees, that we please limit the questions to one per person. And if you're joining us on Zoom, please use the Q&A box. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please post your questions in the comments section on Facebook. Okay, we're going to take a quick look at the poll results that were on your screen for a few minutes there. We had a great turnout today. So we have, in response to the question, which city are you residing in or your association residing in? We have 11% from Chandler, 5% from Glendale, 8% from Goodyear, 33% from Mesa. Wow, that's amazing. 6% from Peoria, 11% from Phoenix, 18% from Scottsdale, 6% from Surprise, and 2% from Tempe. So really great turnout today. The next question was, what is your current role with the association? So we have 64% attending today are board members, 8% are managers, and 26% are interested homeowners, and the other are 2%. So really good representation of members of our industry, key stakeholders in our industry here today, with kind of a emphasis more so on the board, and then a larger than normal population of interested homeowners here today. So welcome, everybody. We will make this a worthwhile presentation for you, no matter what your role is for your community. Let's start out real quickly with a couple introductory remarks about new developments in our area of the law that you need to be aware of. The first one is that there was a HUD, Housing and Urban Development Memorandum, that was recently put out regarding emotional support animals. And I'd like to just briefly talk about what does this mean for Arizona associations. So emotional service animal requests can be kind of a stressful issue for boards. And why is that? Because maybe you live in a condo and maybe your board has a restriction that says that you cannot have any pets in your particular unit. And an owner comes to the board and wants to have a dog in their unit as an emotional support pet. And so there's always been kind of like a process that's been followed for associations if they're in this situation. And we want to kind of go over what the new regulations are in the HUD memo for associations that might be facing an issue like this. And this also could expand to something like an association has a common area pool and an owner wants to bring a dog into the pool. And maybe traditionally the associations had not allowed a dog into the pool unless it was a service animal for like somebody who's blind or a hearing dog. And they really hadn't had this issue with an emotional support pet, wanting to come to the pool with the resident. So let's go over what the HUD memo says. So first, an animal is not protected simply because it's called an emotional support animal or because it makes somebody feel better. To qualify, an animal has to be necessary for the person to use and enjoy their home, just like anyone else. So it can't just be like a nice to have pet. I have an adorable little Maltese that our family has. And of course, I love our dog and I would love to have the dog with me at all times, but there are certain places I can't take the dog because my dog Bailey isn't necessary for me to use and enjoy my home like anybody else. So, I would have to be respectful of that. HUD is also much more skeptical of quick online emotional support tests or ESA letters, emotional support animal letters, that are kind of like form letters that you pay for on the internet and internet registrations for emotional support animals. Associations can reasonably now ask for a letter from a licensed provider who actually treats the resident, confirming that there is a disability and that the animal helps with limitations related to living in the home. A certificate of registry alone is no longer enough. You have to have a letter from a licensed provider who actually treats the particular resident. Even when the animal qualifies as an assistance animal, associations can still enforce reasonable rules in the association, like the dog has to be on a leash when in common areas. Owners have to pick up after the waist of a dog. The dog can't create a nuisance or unnecessary noise with barking. The association can also, address aggressive behavior by a dog or repeated damage by a dog to common areas or other common area landscaping or common areas, hallways if you live in a condo. Okay, so what should boards do in response to this HUD memo? Okay, the bottom line on the HUD memo is, okay, you can't just go to the internet anymore and just get like a certificate saying, hey, Bailey's an emotional support animal, so now I should be allowed to keep her in my condo, even though my condo doesn't allow us to have pets. We're going to have a letter. The association can ask for a letter from a licensed provider who actually treats the resident and confirming that there's a disability and that the animal helps with limitations related to living in the home. And we can still enforce our rules or any restrictions we have on the documents pertaining to any emotional support animals which may be allowed to live in your association, despite having a rule or a restriction in your CCNRs that says no animals are allowed within a unit. So what can boards do in response to this HUD memorandum? You may want to update your assistance animal or ESA policies if this is a common issue in your association to clarify like what documentation an owner has to submit or a resident has to submit in order to be qualified as an emotional support animal for your association. You also may want to make a statement referencing new HUD memorandum and a link to it, and also use a consistent process as a board for reviewing any requests that come your way. Look at each case individually that's submitted by an owner or resident regarding an emotional support animal and document what the board did and why. If you have questions, reach out to your trusted advisors, your management company, your attorney, and ask for their opinion before you would ever go and deny an emotional support animal, just to make sure that you're on solid legal ground. And if you have a tricky emotional support animal question or situation, please feel free to reach out to our firm or myself to talk about what strategies are to best manage the situation. Okay, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the new legislation in Arizona. So as some of you may have heard, our legislature in Arizona adjourned early on Saturday morning, June 13th, 2026. And this brings the 2026 legislative session to a close. Some highlights of the session: there were lots of bills introduced pertaining to associations, over 30. As you know, throughout the entire legislative session between January and, even right now, middle of June, we were doing weekly updates regarding what was happening in the legislature, what bills were being introduced that pertain to associations, and what bills were moving forward to pass the House and the Senate and ultimately to get to the governor's desk to sign. Okay, as of right now, the legislature closed on Saturday. As of right now, we only have 3 bills that the governor has currently signed, 2 of which directly pertain to associations, one of which is kind of indirectly related to associations. However, there are 5 bills currently sitting on the governor's desk pertaining to associations, and the governor's making a decision right now whether or not to sign them. So we're going to have to update you when we teach our neighborhood services class for August on what happened with these other 5 bills. I'm pretty sure most of them will be signed, so we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about them. Also, look at our website and make sure you're subscribing for our Mulcahy memos. You can do that by contacting info@mulcahylawfirm.com, and we'll add you to the memo that's sent out twice a week pertaining to just hot topics and things that are important that you might need to know as a board member or a homeowner in an association. We'll be providing the update quicker than the August Neighborhood Services Seminar if you go to our website or you sign up for our Mulcahy memos. Okay, let's talk quickly about what are the bills that have been signed by the governor this year. So first, let's talk about the one that's related to associations. This is a bill regarding assisted living homes, and it's Senate Bill 1473. I believe my firm is going to be providing a summary of probably the most recent summary that we had in a link. So you'll also be able to look at that or also look at our homepage of our website where we have all these bills listed on a summary. Okay, so Senate Bill 1473, the impact of this bill is that it applies to cities and counties. It doesn't directly apply to HOAs and condominiums, but basically the practical impact of this bill is that we're going to see an increase in the number of small assisted living homes in communities, because this bill limits local government restrictions on small living homes serving 10 or fewer residents, which is kind of like the target market for assisted living homes and HOA. And so basically it kind of lifts some restrictions on small assisted living homes and makes it easier for them to obtain permits and operate in, different municipalities, cities, towns, etc. So we're going to see an increase in the number of assisted living homes, I think, as a result of this law. It does not restrict or reduce or alter in any way our association's ability to enforce governing documents for assisted living homes. So if there's parking problems or nuisance problems, we'll still be able to treat the owners in that home as like we would treat any other owner, any residents in that home, like we would treat any other resident in the community. So we can still continue to enforce CC&R restrictions related to parking, noise, and other nuisance type issues. Just as a reminder, a question that I commonly get is, our CC&Rs have a provision in there that says that you cannot operate a business out of your home. Isn't an assisted living center, a violation of that provision in our CC&Rs? So the quick answer on that is the Fair Housing Act carves out an exemption for group homes, and assisted living centers typically will fall under the group homes exception. And so associations cannot prohibit a group home as long as it falls under the categories that you're allowed to have a group home for under the Fair Housing Act. Typically the most common ones we see are group home for the elderly, group home for the disabled. Those are the most common things. Sometimes we'll see one that's a little more uncommon, like a group home for recovering addicts. And so just so it's lifting the restrictions a little bit right now with this new law, and we'll have to see how this impacts associations in 2026 and 2027, see if there's an increase in the number. In the past, there was kind of a restriction that each city, town, municipality, or county would have in terms of how many group homes you could have in a geographic location. And so some of those restrictions are now being lifted. So we kind of anticipate that there will be more group homes going forward in Arizona client communities. Okay, let's talk about the next 2 bills, which these bills directly apply to associations. And again, the assisted living bill and these next 2 bills have been signed by the governor. All of these bills are going to go into effect 90 days after the legislature ends their legislative session, so 90 days from last Saturday. The next 2 bills are one is on shade structures that applies only to planned communities. And this bill is House Bill 2342. And basically, this bill prohibits associations from banning the installation or use of backyard shade structures, regardless of what the governing documents say. It allows associations, however, to adopt reasonable rules regarding the placement, size, and appearance of backyard shade structures, so long as those rules do not prevent installation, impair function, restrict use, or unreasonably increase cost. These rules are required or cannot be more restrictive than municipal zoning ordinances for height and setbacks. And lastly, it defines shade structure as a commercially produced or professionally manufactured movable or permanent structure designed to provide shade, including umbrellas, awnings, shade sails, gazebos, pergolas, and canopies. So bottom line for planned communities, you're gonna have to be really careful if you're a board, if you're getting applications for shade structures. Associations cannot prohibit them in the backyard. And even if your documents have something that, may seem to appear to not allow you, or, say no shade structures, this law is going to override it. We can pass rules in the near future. We're going to be coming up with some sample rules for boards that they may want to implement, planned community boards, if they see this as a problem and they want to get some rules out there before people start flooding with applications for shade structures. But again, the rules that the association creates cannot be more restrictive than applicable municipal zoning ordinances for height and setbacks. You're going to have to kind of look at, for your particular city, town, or municipality that you live in, what are those requirements, and we can't be more restrictive than that. Okay, the next bill applies to both planned communities and condominiums, and it's House Bill 4011, Duty to Act Reasonably. This is really kind of an interesting bill. It imposes a statutory duty to act reasonably as a board in the exercise of discretionary powers. This requires association board members' decisions to be made neutrally, fairly, and without any favoritism, and in a non-arbitrary manner. So this is obviously a subjective test. It's not objective criteria. But it's something, it's a word of caution for boards. So when you're making decisions pertaining to matters in your association, if you're a planned community and condominium, this applies to you. So you're going to be held to, a reasonable care standard in any discretionary, powers that you may have for the association. And you need to be neutral, fair, and not, favoritize any person or any situation over another. And you got to do it and make your decisions in a non-arbitrary manner. Now, this is kind of nebulous, right? How do we, know every decision we make, there are different facts, especially when we have situations like maybe we're waiving late fees, on an owner because, they're going to pay the balance due, but only if they, we waive the late fees, and maybe we make some other owner pay late fees. It's going to really put us in some dicey situations there, because we're going to be held to a standard that, hey, we got to treat everybody fairly and neutrally and without favoritism. So if we're waiving late fees on one and not on the other, there's going to need to be a reason why we're allowing, that waiver to go through. So it's going to definitely create some situations for board where you're going to need to reach out to your legal counsel and talk through, whether the decision that you're making is in compliance with your duty to act reasonably. I think that will also help you because you will be able to show that, hey, in an effort to make sure we're making the best possible choice, we reached out to our management company, we reached out to our insurance agent, we reached out to our attorney to get their opinion because they're the experts on these issues. But just a law to watch. Again, all three of these laws, the assisted living homes, shade structures, and the duty to act reasonably, will go into effect 90 days from June 13th, which was last Saturday. Okay, now let's talk quickly about, there's 5 bills that are sitting on the governor's desk right now. And how it works is bills are sent to the governor and they have a certain number of days, I think it's like 5, the governor has a certain number of days, like 5, to, sign the bills or to reject them, veto them. I really don't expect her to veto any of these bills, but we shall see. So probably by next Monday, we'll know for sure, and we'll have it updated as to what happened with these 5 bills. But first one, Senate Bill 1184. This is a flag bill. It's going to extend the ability of an owner in a condominium or a planned community to, include division level flags of the United States Armed Forces. And it defines, in detail what a division flag is for armed forces. Interestingly, this bill also removes The 6-month lien rights penalty for condominium associations that improperly restrict real estate signage. So just kind of like a weird, provision in this military flags bill. Flags and signs are under the same section. And we used to, if we violated the signs rule, there was a restriction on, could we had a penalty of, 6-month liens rights penalty if we, improperly made a bad choice on signage for an owner in the association. So the second bill is Senate Bill 1246. This is foreclosure thresholds. Basically, what this does is mirror the law that was passed last year for Planned Communities Act. And basically, it aligns the condominium foreclosure thresholds with now the planned community threshold. So associations, if this is signed by the governor, will not be able to foreclose earlier, the earlier of 18 months delinquent or $10,000 owed. It does also clarify for a special assessment of $10,000 or more, only the 18-month delinquency threshold will apply. And then it also applies some special assessment provisions to both condominiums and planned communities, as I discussed right there about when the threshold kicks in. Senate Bill 1290 is a bill that further clarifies and defines open meetings for planned communities. And this bill kind of mirrors the recent case law that was decided maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago about decisions in executive session. So this bill mirrors that decision, and it says that this bill effectively prohibits any action to be taken in a closed meeting of the board by adding the phrase "without action" to the final sentence of 33-1804A. And so this bill only applies to planned communities. The case law, of course, applies to both condos and planned communities. So this is just, further codification through a statute about not being able to make decisions in executive session for planned communities. And then the next bill, there's 2 more that are sitting on the governor's desk right now, Senate Bill 1808. This talks about flags again. So regardless of what the governing documents say, associations cannot prohibit or may not prohibit the display of a flag from a nation that is allied with the United States as a major non-NATO ally that was established on May 14th, 1948. Really interesting that this bill is, coming to fruition right now. Kind of unusual in my opinion, but it is what it is. The last bill we're going to talk about that's sitting on the governor's desk is House Bill 2397. This talks about resale disclosure statements, and it applies to planned communities and condominiums. The resale disclosure statement typically was provided to a buyer once the escrow company contacted an association to ask for information regarding the association. But this bill significantly is going to expand the resale disclosure requirements for both planned communities and condominiums. And, we're going to go more into depth on that as we, evaluate these bills at next month's session. But it's going to make some changes in how we handle, the resale disclosure statement that's provided. Mainly, it's going to, disclosures must be provided within 10 days after acceptance of a purchase offer. And it increases the scope of what needs to be disclosed to any buyer. Okay, so that's it for the legislative session. Wow, lots of bills this year, 30 bills. We've got 3 that have already been signed by the governor, 5 more that are waiting on the governor's desk, and we'll be talking about the new bills in the legislature that have been signed by the governor and new case law at the July Neighborhood Services HOA Academy. So make sure you tune in for that one, the 3rd Tuesday of July. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about our main presentation today, which is going to be talking about, the different roles of the board members and how to thrive as a board, how to avoid burnout, and how to make good decisions when we're hiring vendors. So let's start out and talk just what are the typical board member roles and responsibilities. So remember that association members are relying on their board to protect and manage what is often the largest asset of a homeowner, their home. And the board is expected to operate in a professional and business-like manner in all dealings that it has with homeowners and in how you manage the common areas, how you communicate with your vendors, how you associate with your vendors, etc. And remember the underlying important theme that the board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the association at all times. They need to place the interests of the association above their own interests when making decisions regarding the board. And they also need to oversee the community as a functioning business. I mean, ultimately, the board is operating as like the CEO or the C-suite of your association. So we need to make good choices in a business-like manner and what's in the best interest of the association when you're making decisions as a board. What are some general responsibilities of the board? And we have a great cheat sheet on this, just in case any of you are interested in, getting a quick summary or a deep dive on board member roles and responsibilities. And either we're sharing it with you here in this presentation, or we will be, you can look it up on our website, mulcahylawfirm.com. We have a lot of cheat sheets, over 60 on different topics. Our most popular one is actually this one on board member roles and responsibilities. Okay, so what are some quick, tips on if you're on your board, what are some responsibilities that you have? Is to read, understand, and comply with the governing documents. So something that I typically advise our clients to do is just take a quick 15 or 20-minute spin through your association documents once a year. So 15 minutes max. So 5 minutes on your CC&Rs, a couple minutes on your bylaws, a couple minutes on your rules, a couple minutes on your architectural guidelines, just so that you're aware of what the document is. And this is going to be, your responsibility to at least be aware that there are documents that pertain to your association and where you need to look if a question comes regarding how to enforce your documents or what owners are required to do. The other responsibility that you have as a board member is to adhere to your fiduciary duty to the corporation. So in my introductory remarks, and even in talking about the new bill that was signed by the governor recently, the board has to take care in how they make their decisions. And you're going to be held to a higher standard now because of that new statute in the Planned Communities Act and the Condo Act, talking about, your responsibility to act reasonably for your community. So let's talk about the fiduciary duty. If there's one thing I'm going to say today, this is probably the most important thing for this entire presentation today. So antennas up, this is an important topic. So a board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the association. That comprises of three things: duty of care, duty of confidentiality, and the duty to avoid conflicts of interest. So when you're serving on your board, you have a duty of care. And that means you need to investigate things. You need to understand issues. You need to be curious about problems and look for ways to solve the problems. Rely on your experts and your trusted advisors to give you advice so that you can make good decisions. So first duty of care. Second one, duty of confidentiality. That means you have to keep whatever information you learn about in executive session quiet. You cannot talk about that with anybody other than board members, the attorney for the association, and the management company. You cannot go home and tell your wife about it, or your spouse, your husband. You cannot tell your pickleball group, your mahjong group, none of that. Whatever you hear in executive session stays in executive session, and that's your duty of confidentiality. The last duty that you have under the fiduciary duty is duty to avoid self-dealing or conflicts of interest. And what this means is you can't personally profit from serving on your board. So I serve on my board right now. I can't be wink, wink, having the landscaper come over and, totally revegetate my lawn or my garden, plant new flowers at no expense to me because, I'm on the board and I, am basically making the decision to employ this landscaping company. That is, improper. And so you have a duty to avoid any time where there's a conflict of interest regarding any decision that you make regarding the association. And you have a duty to not financially benefit from serving on your board. So those are the three fiduciary duties. Those are very important for you to remember when you're serving on a board. Some other duties that I think are notable that we should discuss is make sure that you're treating the association like a business and you're operating it like a business. So use licensed and bonded contractors. Get several bids when you're doing, major projects so that you make sure that you're paying the market rate. Another thing, oversee the management company. Yes, if you have a management company, it's awesome because you can delegate a lot for them to do, but they also need to be, checked every once in a while, and you need to oversee them to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing under the terms of your contract. Now, there's a fine line between overseeing and micromanaging. So I don't want to push you over the line of micromanaging everything that your management company is doing, because that is not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is they've got a contract with the association, the management company. They should be doing what they're supposed to be doing under the contract. And, as a board, I'm on my board. I've been on my board for too long, frankly, 14, 15 years now, maybe longer. I have to add up the numbers in my head. But, like I got up this morning and went to exercise. And when I was driving back home, I was looking at the street, the wall that faces the street in my association, and there was a lot of trash there. And it was upsetting to me as a board member. And so it's not micromanaging for me to send an email to the manager and be like, hey, let's have the landscaping crew take a look at that and make sure that we get that trash picked up this week. That's okay. But, stopping by the manager's office and sitting in the chair and, taking all their time today, that's micromanaging, talking about issues. Quick email saying, hey, you may not be aware of this. Can you take a look at this? That's fine. Also making sure that at the board meeting, that when the management company is giving their report, that you're actually checking the financials, and just making sure that, like, let's say they have a violations report, making sure that they're coming to the property once a month or whatever your contract says, once a week, maybe, to look for violations. Make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing under the contract, but don't cross the line and micromanage them to death. Giving notice and holding regular board meetings and annual meetings in compliance with the Arizona open meeting law requirements. We have a great cheat sheet on open meetings. I really encourage you to take a look at that. It's evolving and developing based upon case law and, new statutes that are being, signed by the governor as part of the legislative process. Probably the biggest issue this year with regular board meetings is that we no longer can make decisions in executive session. So all those decisions that we made previously in executive session have now been pushed to the open session. I would also encourage you to look at the open meeting cheat sheet that we have. Be really careful as a board. Anytime a quorum of the board is meeting to discuss association business, it needs to be an open meeting. We can go into executive session for discussion only of 5 topics. The most common topics that we can discuss only in executive session are going to be like advice from your attorney, violations, delinquencies, and maybe an issue with a vendor or an employee at the association, like a performance issue that you want to discuss. Again, no voting in executive session. A couple of the things I see, tripwires for associations on the open meeting law. Remember, you have to give notice of an open board meeting 48 hours in advance of the meeting. You also have to give notice of the executive session meeting, even though it's just the board and owners aren't allowed to attend. Same requirement, 48 hours in advance of the meeting. You are required to have an annual meeting, which is a meeting of the membership once a year. There are some special requirements for getting notice out about that meeting. It's not less than 10, not more than 50 days in advance of the annual meeting. Notice needs to be sent to the membership. We have a cheat sheet too on annual meetings, so I think could be really helpful if you're new to the area or you want to talk about more information about how to run an annual meeting for your association. Let's see. Some other things that I think are really important fiduciary responsibilities are, following and enforcing the CC&Rs, the rules and regulations, the bylaws of your association. So again, we talked about the importance of knowing what they say, but then also board members, you need to be following the documents. Like, you can't be, if it says, something about, a restriction in the documents, like you can't have a shed in your backyard. Board members, you're held to the highest standard. You absolutely 100% cannot be violating the documents. On that same note, we have to enforce it sometimes against our neighbors because they're not, living up to what the documents require the owner to do. So it's fairly, reasonably now with the new statute enforcing the CC&R's rules and bylaws. Also fairly collecting delinquent assessments. We're seeing a little uptick in the number of delinquencies and associations. The economy has slowed down a little bit. People are carrying debt. If we believe what the news media is saying about this, and I do, because I'm starting to see increasing the number of trustee sales and increasing the number of bankruptcies that are coming through our office for owners that aren't, paying their assessments, and maybe they're taking these drastic actions because, they're not able to pay their debts. So stay on top of those delinquencies. Don't let any owner be more than 90 days behind in payment of assessments. If they are in that stage, after 90 days, move it to your attorney to have the attorney try to collect the debt. A couple other things I think they're important for us to know. Don't forget that if you're going to fine an owner, we have to give notice of the violation and opportunity to be heard before we levy the fine. That's just an important, factoid that you need to know as a board member. Don't forget that if owners want to review and inspect the books and records of the association, we have to allow that. So there are certain things that they can't have, very few and far between, but for the most part, owners can inspect records of the association, and they can either, request it, inspect them in person, or have copies made at 15 cents a page. Very few things they can't have. It would be like legal advice from the attorney if we're involved in any active litigation. They can't have anything on that. They can't find out, compensation of employees or independent contractors. So we can redact that if you choose to do that as a board. Okay, let's talk a little bit about communication. So what are some of your responsibilities? What's the most important responsibility? Probably communication. The boards that communicate the best, guess what? They have the fewest problems. So remember that when you're serving on your board, one of your responsibilities is to have good communication with your owners. Let them know what's going on. Give them notice of the meetings, compliance with Arizona law. Send out write-ups on important topics in advance so that people are aware of issues, and make the minutes freely, available on your website so that if anybody is interested in something, they can go and check the minutes for your association and read up on what's been going on. Have those right on, the homepage so anyone can see them anytime after they're approved. Have your governing documents on your website. Have all the forms that you might need for architectural approval. Just keep people informed about what's going on with your association, and you're going to have a lot fewer problems. The associations that try to hide things and don't want to give records and, don't want to tell homeowners how money is being spent, those associations have the biggest problems because all that lack of transparency results in people getting amped up and upset, and it ends up being a nightmare to serve on the board. Okay, a couple of the things that are important. Don't forget, every year you have to prepare an annual budget. So many of you will be preparing your budget for 2027, late summer, 2026. We've got a great cheat sheet on preparing budgets on our webpage, mulcahylawfirm.com, if you're interested in learning more about that. Also, be aware of the fact that, it's beneficial for your association to have a reserve study done. And have the reserve study done, and then as a board, look at it at least a couple times a year to make sure that we're on track for the reserve. A reserve study is typically done by a professional reserve company who has experience in coming up with plans for how to manage long-term capital improvements in your association. It's like a savings account. You put money aside every month, goes into the savings account, so that then when that element, is no longer has a useful life, then basically what happens is you use some money from your reserve account to pay to have that item fixed. So it could be roads, pools, roofs for the common areas, that type of thing. We also have a great cheat sheet on reserve studies that I would encourage you to take a look at on our website at mulcahylawfirm.com. Don't forget that there's an audit, review, or compilation requirement for planned communities and condominiums. So every year you have to have an audit, review, or compilation done by June 30th of the next year. So all the 2025 audits are going to be due here in a couple of weeks. And then owners can request to see the audit, review, or compilation for your association. You only have to have an audit by CPA if your bylaws require you to have an audit be done annually by a CPA. Otherwise, really anyone can do this audit, review, or compilation for your board. Try to have somebody independent and with some financial experience doing this. Let's see, a couple other things. Make sure you have proper insurance for your association. Typically, you're going to have, a general liability policy. You're going to have directors and officers policy. You're going to have a fidelity bond. But look at your CC&Rs. It will outline what insurance you're required to have for your association. Give the CC&Rs to your insurance agent. Have them double check to make sure that we have adequate insurance based upon what the CC&Rs require. Next tip is going to be hire professionals who are qualified to help your association. So your attorney, very important, team member. Make sure that they exclusively practice in the area of representing associations, that they have a lot of experience in working with associations. Check their references, check their online profile and their reviews on Google, Yelp. These should all be a window to the person that you're hiring to help you with your legal needs for your association. Also, your trusted team, rely on them to help you, your insurance agent, your reserve specialist, your attorney, your management company, your landscaping company, your pool company. All of these people are hired as your, board of directors for the board, right, to help you make good decisions and to make sure that your association is healthy and in good compliance with, the different aspects of running your association, whether it's that the common areas look nice or that your meetings are being run pursuant to Arizona law or, that homeowner requests are being responded to in a timely manner by your management company. All of these are examples of hiring professionals to help your association with tasks that are delegated to them by the board. Don't forget, there's a couple things that you are required to do. You have to file taxes and state and local taxes as an association every year. You are required to also file an annual report with the Arizona Corporation Commission to keep your nonprofit status as an association. Very important to limit liability for your association. So you want to make sure, don't forget to file those state and federal taxes, and then also file your annual report with the State of Arizona Corporation Commission. Lastly, this is just kind of like an important tip. Be nice, okay? When you're serving on your board, be approachable, be professional, and treat others in a business-like manner. I attended a meeting yesterday. It was like a subcommittee meeting, actually, for my association where I live. And truly, I was horrified by how people were treated at the meeting. And I serve on this committee. It's a subcommittee for our association. It really was upsetting to me. And last night I did take the time to write an email to the president and the entire board and the management company saying, we need to do better. Like, we need to treat people respectfully who come to meetings and who may have a differing opinion on something. We need to be able to accept constructive feedback. We're not perfect. Things aren't always perfect in our association. And we should say, hey, thank you for taking the time to come here. And thank you for telling us about the trash in front of the wall, in the front of our complex. Or thank you for letting us know about some problems that you're seeing in our pool this summer. Be nice. It doesn't cost much. It goes a long way. And if you're approachable and businesslike and professional, things are going to be a lot easier for your association. If you're difficult, can't accept criticism, don't take feedback, it's going to be a long ride on the board for the time that you're serving on the board. So really take that into consideration. Also, I find that the boards that are nice and that try to work with people and that are reasonable, they also have fewer legal problems. Typically, they're not getting sued. They're not named defendants in lawsuits very frequently. They are, being reasonable and working with owners and, making pivots and apologizing when there's mistakes. So it goes a long way to be nice. So important thing to remember. Okay, so we kind of covered a lot on the board member roles and responsibilities here. So we are going to kind of move on now and talk a little bit about what are some board member responsibilities. And I know that we have a cheat sheet on this specifically, but kind of there's a few key people that I want to just briefly mention. So the president obviously is kind of like the point guard, quarterback of the team for football. They're going to be the leader for the association and the board. They need to lead by example. They need to be professional. They need to be following the law. They need to be, caring. They need to understand that they don't have authority beyond what authority the board gives them. So they're not just like an island out there making decisions about the board, spending money. They're the elected leader of the organization that's helped directing policy, creating an agenda for the year, goals, kind of like the main person overseeing the whole field, just like a quarterback would be of a football team. They need to work closely with the board, have a good relationship with other board members, have a good relationship with the management company and any other vendors that you have, and a good relationship with owners and residents to establish trust and for people to feel comfortable that the board's being transparent and that there's nothing funny going on. So that's the leader of that organization. Ultimately, this person runs the board meeting, leads the board meeting. With regard to the new case that was just decided recently, we need to make sure that the board talks about this and that you give the board president the authority to create the agenda for every board meeting and any meeting of the membership. Just vote on that at a board meeting saying, okay, Beth Mulcahy as president of the ABC Association has the ability or has our authority to make the agenda every month for a regular board meeting. And that case kind of appears to imply that we need to have that somewhere in writing so that it's clear who makes the agenda for associations. Really, the role of the president is overseeing the well-being of the association, the fiscal well-being, the budget process, assessment collection, reserve funding, insurance coverage, making sure the common areas are being maintained, making sure that our vendors are doing what they're supposed to be doing under their contracts, and just keeping good relationships with other board members and good relationships with the community as a whole. Of course, the board can delegate responsibilities, but ultimately the board president, the buck stops with you. So things aren't going well in your association. You need to take a hard look in the mirror and get some advice on what we can do to turn it around, because you are the person that is, in charge of making sure things run smoothly in your association. A couple other roles that I want to talk about real quickly. The treasurer, also a very important role. They're going to be overseeing and maintaining the association's financial and accounting records. If any of you are treasurers on this call today, one point I want to mention is that theft and fraud and embezzlement of association funds is scary, but very much real and out there right now. And so I would really encourage you, if you're serving as treasurer of your association, check out our cheat sheet on how to prevent theft and fraud of association funds. It's a great read. I've seen many associations, unfortunately, go through this process where they're untangling, the theft of association funds. Sometimes it's small, like under 100 grand. Sometimes it's really big, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So preventing it is really important. As treasurer, you're kind of like the first line of defense. You should be really watching things. You're in charge of overseeing and maintaining the association's financial and accounting records. You should be reviewing those financial records monthly, and the bank statements, the original bank statement. You're in charge of creating the operating budget for 2027. You're making sure that we're staying on task on the year-to-date budget. So every month you should be looking at, okay, well, we're over on, electric, but, we're under in a few other areas. So it's all going to even out. You should be giving a report at every meeting. Also, you're making sure that the insurance is being renewed for the association and, implementing safeguards and internal controls to protect the association's assets and funds. And so those are kind of the two really important, board officers. It's important and notable. I want you to just understand, hey, you've got a heightened responsibility, and these are my thoughts on what your heightened responsibilities are. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how to prevent board member burnout and how to promote well-being when you're serving on the board. So I have been on my board, like I said, for 14 plus years. And I'm not going to lie to you, I'm a little burned out right now. And there have been other times in the time that I've served on my board where I've also been burned out, but I've been able to recover from it and come back strong. So a couple of things I want to give you some tips. If you're sitting here today and you're on your board, you're one of the 62% or however many, 60, how many people do we have here today for the board members? Somewhere over 60% of you are sitting in this chair right now, listening to this seminar, and you're a board member. If I had to guess, I would bet that probably every one of you here has some sort of burnout on serving on your board, because let's face it, it's a tough job. Serving on a board is a volunteer job. You're not getting paid for this, right? And it's a significant investment of time and energy. Right now, my association is undergoing a major renovation. And, the renovation started in September, and we are past the date that it should have been finished, and we are over budget by a little bit, not too much, but enough that I'm a little worried that we can't make any more change orders. Okay, and this process has been like almost every night of the week, I go and look at the progress of, what's going on in my particular association. And I'm not even the president or the treasurer of my association, but I do care. And I want to make sure that we're catching problems early and fixing them as part of this construction project. And that has been exhausting, especially exhausting because of homeowners, right? Homeowners like often approach us and say, we don't like this, we don't like that, and we're just trying to make decisions which are for the best interests of the entire community. And we can't, unfortunately, we can't always get sidetracked with somebody that doesn't like the art in the new clubhouse because it's not colorful enough. We hired an interior designer, and everybody agreed that this was the right person we selected, and we have to trust their judgment. And, maybe it's not exactly my personal taste, because honestly, it's not, but it looks pretty, and it looks pretty for a corporate clubhouse, right? This is, not my living room. This is a clubhouse, which, we go to, a lot of people in our community go to. So, you're going to find that when you're serving on the board, you're volunteer, you're giving a lot of time, you're making the tough decisions, and it gets to be a lot sometimes. You go to meetings and, people start yelling and they're not happy about decisions that you're making. And honestly, they really may not understand the financial constraints we're under, the pressure that we may have to get projects done on time, etc. And so what I find with most of my clients and who are board members for associations, and also just with myself too, is when my other demands in my life need me, sometimes it makes serving on the board a little more challenging because, maybe you've got a sick parent or a sick child, or maybe you're really busy at work right now with a huge project. And then now you've got the HOA tugging on you. I need you. So it's kind of like the jealous mistress is what I sometimes call my service on the HOA board, because it needs me all the time, right? But I've got all these other responsibilities too. So, let's talk about like how you can define, okay, what does board burnout look like? And what are some steps you can do to push through it? Because you definitely can. And I can give you exact strategies on how you can do that. So I think board burnout can be a couple things. Number one, you're laying awake at night and you're worrying about an association problem, which is bad, right? Because, again, this is a volunteer thing and you're only one of many board members, right? But you're feeling the weight of the problems and you're not quite sure how to solve them. And then sometimes you know how to solve them, but you don't have the votes on the board to get it done. And that can be especially frustrating. Sometimes we see burnout in other ways, like board members just stop showing up, right? They don't respond to communications, they don't come to board meetings, and they just check out. Maybe increased frustration with the time commitment that's required, or increased frustration that's expressed at board meetings to homeowners, maybe in an unprofessional way. Or maybe you're fighting with other board members just because you're just getting sick of being on the board, right? People start saying things like, I'm going to resign, or I'm not going to run again this year. That's a really indicative of, okay, this person's hitting the wall on board burnout. And just generally feeling overwhelmed by association issues and responsibilities, like having to stay up late at night to do things for the association after working a whole full day of work. And when these signs start to appear, boards should evaluate whether responsibilities are being evenly distributed among board members and whether changes might be needed to reduce the burden. Or maybe you have somebody who is a president or a treasurer or an officer of the association and they have difficulty delegating. Like unless they do it, no one can do it better than me syndrome. That can be problematic because that you're not delegating things and now you're exhausted because you're doing so much board. So what are some strategies that we can come up with that will help you, push through board burnout? Because if I had to guess, probably almost everybody on this call here, unless you're a brand new board member, is feeling a little bit of burnout. So number one, when when you're looking for board members, okay, educate and prepare them. Hey, this is going to be a tough job. And here's the responsibilities. We meet once a month, and it's expected that you come every month. Give them a little orientation, maybe even have a buddy system. That's what we do on my board. Get somebody new who comes on the board. We buddy them up with somebody who's been on the board for a while. We kind of show them, okay, this is the board packet. We get 2 nights before the board meeting, and the meeting's always set up this way. We really like it if you read it in advance so that when we get in there for the meeting, you can make decisions quickly. And, we try to keep the meeting to no more than an hour if possible. And the best way to do that is to meet in advance and have a timed agenda. And then we just stick to that timed agenda for each subject. And that helps us get our 1 hour board meeting done. Educate people in advance so that they know, okay, this is a time commitment, and about how much of a time commitment it is. Because we've seen board members who may get elected because they're upset, but there's not enough pickleball at the association or something like that. And then they get into the board and they're like, I don't want to do this. This is like the third Thursday of every month, I got to go, and go to my board meeting and have all the homeowners come in and yell at us. Like, yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. So you want to tell people in advance, hey, like, this is what the responsibilities are. This is the time commitment. These are the challenges we face, and make sure that they're, in on it, because you do need a type of person to serve on your board who's a stick it out person. You don't want a bunch of people who just are quitters. So you've got to have people who understand the commitment and who have a vision for what they want to accomplish in the association by serving on the board. Establish some communication boundaries. I always laugh, and this is a long time ago. My children were young. Now they're 19 and 18. But, I was serving on the board, and we had a real hot topic going on. I think there was some renovation to one of the lagoons in our neighborhood. And there was somebody on the board with me, and she just was communicating with me all the time. I was serving as president of the association the longest year of my life. By the way, when you serve as a president, because it's just so many responsibilities, and it's a very hard position to have. So anyways, I counted up in a 3-month period how many times she contacted me by email. You wouldn't believe it. It was like over 300 emails to me with questions, demands, wanting records, just a total nightmare. And kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was it was Good Friday, and I was calling Easter eggs with my children, and she knocks on my front door and wants to talk to me about association business. This is where you have to establish boundaries, okay? I said, I'm not talking to you right now because I'm doing something with my family, and it's Good Friday. And, going forward, send me 1 email a week. I don't want 15, I want 1. If you put everything in that 1 email, and don't ever come to my house again without having an appointment or without me agreeing to it, because it's, you've, violated a boundary with my family today by stopping by. Once I established those communication boundaries, I did it in a nice way, but I was firm. She needed somebody to be firm. And it made my life so much easier, because before I was just kind of dealing with it and getting annoyed. But once I established that boundary, it helped me with burnout of dealing with her. And then she, of course, tested me, and I had to say, no, 1 email a week. That's all I'm responding to, is put everything in 1 email. Utilize your committees. Committees can assist with a lot of different things: architecture review, landscaping, social events, special projects, research on things. They help distribute the workload. Hopefully your association has enough volunteers that you can have a committee. Some associations are like, they can't even get board members. So having a committee is, not really something that is even possible. But if you have, an army of people that want to help, use the committees to help you get the work done. Consider utilizing professional management. That if you're self-managed and you're feeling burned out, you need a bridge to get to a management company. And our firm can help you with some different strategies to do that, and some suggestions on which management companies might be a good fit for your location, your size, and your needs. But the management company can be a huge sigh of relief for many self-managed associations. And if you're a board member and you don't like the management company you have right now, maybe consider asking for a management change, or consider maybe moving to a different management company, which can give you a higher level or better level of service. Develop a strategy for those difficult owners. So you're going to have difficult owners in your time serving on the board. Come up with some boundary rules. If the difficult owner is contacting you a lot, you're going to have to say, don't contact me anymore on my personal email. Come to the board meeting if you have a question. Follow written enforcement and complaint procedures. So, they shouldn't be texting you if the procedure is to contact the management company regarding, something they see that needs to be fixed in the association. If you get a real difficult person, have that person only communicate with the management company or only communicate with the attorney. And avoid informal discussions with the difficult owner, because they typically escalate into conflict. So don't get one-on-one with the difficult owner. Just tell them to come to the board meeting and be happy to listen to, whatever issues you have at that time. But I don't, when I'm on my walk, or when I'm on a run, or when I'm, coloring Easter eggs with my children, you should not be stopping by my house. And there's a nice way that you can say that so it doesn't offend anybody. And honestly, usually they get it. They're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. That was kind of, not appropriate that I did that. Promote professional board conduct. This is a huge one. Be respectful of directors, relationships, communications, be respectful of each other. Okay. No yelling, screaming, shouting, no profanities, no, negative emails, no, posting on Facebook about how much you dislike somebody on the board. Be respectful, be professional, in your board conduct. Support board decisions once they've been made. Okay, you may not agree with the board, you may have voted against something, but ultimately you're a member of this team. And if you are at a meeting and, something passes that you don't like, you should not be going around the neighborhood after the meeting talking about what idiots the boards are, how they made such a big mistake, getting on social media, talking about things. That is wrong, and that is against your fiduciary responsibilities to the association. Really avoid public criticism of board actions. It's a very bad idea. Run good meetings. This is a good way to avoid burnout, right? Get the packet out early, have people be ready to come to the meeting, ready to vote on things, make them fast. There's nothing worse than a 3-hour board meeting. Truly, nothing worse than a 3-hour board meeting. So have a great packet that's organized so that board members can get in there, make decisions quickly, and be done in an hour. If you're having trouble having that 1-hour board meeting, you may want to look at our cheat sheet on how to have an effective board meeting an hour or less on our website, mulcahylawfirm.com. Probably the best advice I give you is using a timed agenda. Okay, support the board, support board members. When you see someone struggling, reach out to them and be like, hey, I can tell that you're kind of struggling about being on the board, but mainly this needs to go to your president. But I just want to let you know, I see you. Like, I see you putting in all the hours. I see all the different things you're doing to bring us together. I see you taking the time to, manage a problem. And I just want to let you know, we really appreciate you. Thank you. Like, nobody ever says that. You get those people who are high achievers, who are president, they need a little encouragement. And so, be supportive of other board members. Last but not least, have a succession plan for your board. Like, this is not a lifetime sentence serving on the board, right? Like, you serve for a certain period of time and then you move on. So talk about as a board, like, how do we get people to serve on committees and volunteer? Because those are the people that we usually test drive to see if they'd be good board members. Mentor future leaders by, if people are coming to board meetings and they're showing interest, ask them, would you ever be interested in running for the board? And, could we maybe put you in charge of this research project, or, to look into something for us and see how they do. Find your successor, right? So when you're serving on the board, if you're starting to feel burned out and you don't think you can push through it, find your successor. Start looking for people in your community who are business people, who are reasonable, who follow the rules. And it may take a phone call to ask them, hey, would you be interested in running the board? Or, can we somehow get you to help us on a project, etc. And kind of my last piece of advice, if you're in burnout phase, is just keep pushing through. because there have been times on my board where I thought, oh, I just don't think I can do this anymore. This is really a drag. And I go to bed and I wake up the next morning and I just keep pushing forward, get a little break from it, maybe take a month off from my board meeting. Occasionally I've done that, especially in the summertime if we're traveling with our children or going to lacrosse tournaments or where we are with our children. I kind of actually looked forward to missing a meeting, and that's okay. As long as they have a quorum, it's okay to take a little break and, regroup for a month and not have to deal with the board issues. Okay, so keep pushing through, get a good night's sleep, and recognize that some of these problems are temporary problems. Something that we often say in our family is when we're dealing with a problem, we say, is this a problem that I'm going to have this? Am I going to still think this is a problem in a month? Or is this just a temporary problem we just need to push through? Most of our issues with board are temporary problems. Okay, last but not least, let's just spend a few minutes talking about selection of vendors. Okay, a couple things on this. We have a great cheat sheet on how to select a management company that I would like you to do a deep dive on. We're going to be sharing that with you on Facebook Live and also on Zoom. You can also find it on our website at mulcahylawfirm.com. So we give you a really great overview on what are some different tips on how to select a management company, what are the questions you should be asking when you're interviewing. A lot of the skills that you may need for selecting vendors are pretty straightforward. So, it depends on which vendor you're looking for, but let's say it's a management company or a landscaping company or a pool company. Ask your trusted advisors, hey, do you have anybody that you think would be a good fit for our community? So that could be your insurance agent. It could be your attorney. It could be your management company. They may have contacts with other associations with vendors. So seek others out and find out, hey, what has been your experience with this area? And do you have anybody you'd suggest? Try to interview at least 2, suggested 3 candidates for any, large positions for your association, like management company, pool company, landscaping. Reserve specialists aren't really that many, so maybe 2, but at least test the waters so you know who else is out there to make sure that you're paying market rate would be, kind of what I'm thinking. Interview them, have a plan going into the interview, check their references. There are other organizations in Arizona that are very helpful to associations on finding vendors. That would be like the Arizona Community Associations Institute branch. So it's the Central Arizona chapter of the Community Associations Institute. They have a webpage that's amazing. They list a number of different vendors there. That could be a resource for you. AACM, Arizona Association of Community Managers, they also have a vendors page on their website. And then your trusted advisors can give you the names of the, different vendors that they may have had, association clients have, or they may have directly worked with other clients. So all of these are good suggestions if you're looking to select a vendor to help your association. Make sure you check if you're in the process of thinking about getting a management company. Our cheat sheet on how to select a management company is very well received, and a lot of people have used that to select a management company, and it has just some great information for you on that. Okay, that's it for today. Wow, we had a lot of people here today. Great job. Thank you so much for being here today. We had 184 viewers on Zoom at our peak during the seminar today. That's got to be like one of our all-time highs. And then we had more people joining us on Facebook Live, which is amazing. Thank you so much for being here today and caring about your associations. Remember, if you're a board member and you're burned out and you listen to this seminar today, keep pushing through because, I forgot to say this, but this is honestly one of the main reasons why I keep pushing through, because I really care about where I live. I want it to be a nice place. I love it there. I want to stay there forever. And I want to see positive change. So you stick it out because it's important, and it's important to you will be, a great place to be. So keep fighting the good fight as board members, and hopefully you can get some suggestions from what we talked about here today to put some gas in the tank so that you have a little more longevity on the board. Okay, a couple reminders. We normally have our first Friday, the first Friday of every month. but is my favorite holiday of the year, 4th of July, on Saturday, July 4th. And we are giving our firm off on July 3rd. So we are not having First Friday on Friday, July 3rd. Never do. We haven't had one in the history of our firm. So just wanted to let you know that. So we're going to be taking a break from our monthly live First Friday event in July due to Independence Day and the 250th year celebration that's going to be going on that entire weekend. And we're going to be resuming our First Fridays on August 7th, Friday, August 7th, for the August First Friday. So just make sure you're not tuning in on July First Friday, because we are going to be celebrating our wonderful country. If you were planning to submit a question for First Friday, you're welcome to do that at info@Mulcahy Law Firm, and it will be answered during the August First Friday event. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our July Neighborhood Services class that we're going to be teaching, HOA Academy. It's going to be on Tuesday, July 21st, 2026, and this is going to be a really important class, so I hope you all tune in. We're going to be talking about what were the final decisions or what final statutes were passed into law this year by the Arizona legislature and signed by our governor. I anticipate it's probably going to be 8 bills. We talked a little bit about each one today. We're going to do more in-depth coverage about what you need to know when they go into effect 90 days after they're all signed, after the legislature ends, And then we're going to talk about those cases that are, out there changing the way that we run our association. So we're going to talk about the case pertaining to no voting in executive sessions. We also had a recent case that was decided last week regarding amending CC&Rs and rules, that it was an unpublished memorandum decision, but also important for us just to kind of see where the Court of Appeals is going on some of these issues, and any case law that's been impactful in 2026 to date. So it's going to be a great class. Going to give you a lot of current information that is changing, and we hope that you will join us so that you can learn more, so that your association is sure to be complying with state law and any case law that pertain to associations. So thanks so much for joining. We look forward to seeing you next month on Tuesday, July 21st, 2026 at our live virtual HOA Academy. Take care, everybody. Happy 4th of July. Bye.